Today in the United States, many rarely think about the origins of the common issues we face: militarization of police, major crime in urban areas, large prison populations, and violence in Latin America. Since collective mindset is so short-term, many accept it as a basic way of life now. How it's always been. Well, it's not. In fact, these issues are very much new and stem from one single conflict: the war on drugs. The war on drugs, or drug war, is not just government action against drugs. Over the decades, it's grown to control many aspects of American life. It's led to a shift of how the United States views its own citizens. This video will aim to put the drug war in perspective. You never know how influential something is until it's gone. So in this video, we'll ask, what if the war on drugs never occurred? In an alternate timeline, the US doesn't go through the harsh strategy it did to curtail drug use. How would our country and practically hemisphere be changed? Here is one scenario. But first, some context. If you wish to skip straight to the scenario, click on this button here. The war on drugs is a 4-decade-long conflict by the United States, domestically and abroad, in an effort to crack down on drug use. Its original aim was to lessen drugs and the impact of drugs on American society. It wasn't until the late 1980s when the goal went from treatment to punishment for drug users. The war took a fundamental turn after this. At first, the term war on drugs was meant metaphorically, like the war on poverty, but soon it became an actual conflict with real bloodshed. The government began arresting those in possession of drugs and those who distribute, driving the trade of drugs further underground and into the black market. In the 1980s, the Mexican cartels and Latin American drug lords rose and split the continents amongst themselves. They profited from the sale of cocaine, marijuana, heroin, and any illicit drug, just as Al Capone had during Prohibition. Their main customers being ironically Americans, where the drugs were illegal. The drug war became entangled with political and social wars across Panama, Colombia, and eventually Mexico. Pablo Escobar made his name as king of cocaine and used his wealth to establish dominance over Colombia. In 2006, the Mexican government declared war on the cartels and sent in troops to crack down on the gangs. This started a decade-long war in which 100,000 people have died, and the cartels are still as strong as ever. Mexico today is plagued by corruption and violence, with its government being barely able to hold on to the land they have. Long story short, the drug war is a failure. Even if somebody is morally against illicit drugs, the facts are evident that the American strategy is not working. Brute force and bashing the problem with a stick didn't help anybody. Drug use among young people is still on the rise, illegal narcotics are still cheap, and crime is still prevalent. It didn't stop society from turning away from drugs, it only drove it underground and fueled violence in the process. So what if the drug war never occurred? What would be the social and political effects in this alternate timeline? Here is one scenario. The original goal of the war on drugs was to lessen and prevent drug use among the American population. In this alternate timeline, the government could still do this, but through different means. To combat the effect of drugs on society, there never needed to be a crackdown on the drug users themselves. This doesn't help anybody. By arresting users instead of treating them, this creates a new society of criminals. If a drug user is arrested, convicted, and serves time for possession, it will be almost impossible to find a reasonable job in the future. By doing so, they can't progress and turn to crime for both money and to fuel their addiction. The drug war actually created more crime, as citizens became criminals after jail because they were imprisoned and have nothing else. In this alternate timeline, the United States does not automatically convict drug users for possession. This changes almost everything. By not convicting for possession, the United States prison population doesn't rise to be the largest in the world. The drug war created the modern militarized police force in the United States. The militarized police that are such a debate in today's society are not in this alternate timeline. Home invasions, pat-downs, and other arguably unconstitutional actions do not occur. Without harsh drug laws to enforce, and to combat the crime which rose from them, police are very different in this alternate America. It's difficult to predict what they would be like, but I assume there would be less tension between the general public and police. Urban areas would be more prosperous. In our timeline, young blacks and Latinos are more likely to be searched and convicted on drug charges, usually happening to young males. Upon release from prison, they lose the opportunity to move up, and this creates a perpetual culture of crime in the inner city. This harms the family unit and created many of the issues we see among urban populations today. Removing the drug war from the equation wouldn't make everything happy and dandy in the inner city, but it would dramatically improve the situation. Less gang activity to peddle drugs and less violence all around. Mexico's political situation would be very different in this alternate timeline. There's no way to predict if the country would be completely stable, as Mexico hasn't always been the most stable nation, but it would be greatly improved. Cartels wouldn't be splitting the entire country up and waging war on one another. The government wouldn't be so corrupt and the people wouldn't be stuck in the crossfire. This leaves better economic opportunity and less immigration into the United States. In Latin America, the violence in Colombia wouldn't have rose due to cocaine production. In fact, multiple operations done in Latin America would not occur at all. However, the drug war was actually useful in some aspects. In this alternate timeline, cocaine and heroin use wouldn't have dropped by 40%. In this alternate timeline, there could still be a government effort to curtail drug use, just in a smarter, responsible, and less violent way. Whether certain drugs would be legal in this scenario is hard to say, but if any drugs were, programs would be implemented to teach responsibility. Think of health advertisements about drunk driving or smoking, but with marijuana. The specifics of this aren't very important. What is that it wouldn't be a literal war on drugs. If the government had attempted to help drug users and combat the epidemic through education and other efforts, perhaps this could have gone down a different path. We'll never truly know. This is just one scenario out of the thousands. What do you think would have happened had the drug war never occurred? Like us on Facebook and subscribe if you have not done so. This is Cody from the Alternate History Hub.